And of course, he assumes that I love the way he always gave the extreme examples of, well, what about all these giraffes and elephants? Was the ark full of giraffes and elephants? I mean, the average size of an animal today is smaller than a sheep if you average all the animals. Why pick the extreme of a giraffe and an elephant? And again, I go back to say, well, Noah could have brought babies, could have brought young ones. That would be the obvious thing. I would do that. I'm only 40. I'm sure Noah figured that out. And God brought the animals to Noah. Noah didn't have to go get them. That's what the Bible says. God brought the animals to Noah. And then he used the extremes to get that boat full of elephants and giraffes and sail into Hurricane Andrew. Well, of course, you're assuming that the whole year-long flood was hurricane conditions. We don't know that. The Bible doesn't say that. It rained 40 days and 40 nights. You don't always have a hurricane when it rains. You realize that. And it may not have been any hurricanes. It may have been a bad storm, lasted 40 days. The water came up, the water coming out from underneath. Noah might have been hundreds of miles from the cracks, the San Andreas Fault, the Hayward Fault, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. He may have been in very tranquil seas for the whole year. The Bible doesn't say. So for me to have to prove that a boat could withstand a hurricane is totally off the subject. I don't have to prove that. He would have to prove that Noah wasn't in tranquil seas. He can't prove that either. It's outside the realm of science. Science has to be observable, testable, and demonstratable. I can demonstrate that a 6-to-1 ratio ship is the perfect ratio to withstand violent weather. That has been demonstrated over and over in shipbuilding courses and things like that. Approximately 6-to-1 ratio. I cannot prove that today we could build a 450-foot long boat that would float, but I cannot prove today how they built the pyramid either. I have no idea how they built it. And then he said that I didn't offer any scientific proof. I think I did. I think I showed that if by only bringing 2 of each kind and not 2 of each individual species, they could easily fit on the ark. That limits the number way down. Let's mention that. Noah's boat only had to float. Let's see. 300-foot max. That's, of course, by today's standards. If you have pre-flood environment with the people much smarter and the people much stronger, and Noah with 100 and some years to do it, he could easily have built that boat. I have no doubt believing that. And he certainly did not prove scientifically it could not be done. He assumed, of course, no iron or steel. And as I mentioned, Ron Wyatt and others have found iron rivets, so it may have been bolted together or it could have been pegged together. There are over 250 different flood accounts from cultures all over the world. There must be a reason for that. Why do 250 different cultures around the world talk about a flood, a worldwide flood in most of them, where a family, or sometimes they say brother and sister, but a family were saved in a boat of some kind? Many of the stories are twisted and perverted, and they don't all match exactly, but they all indicate they must have all come from a common source, like maybe the real worldwide flood. Let's see if I covered everything here. The Bible says the ark was made of gopher wood. The Hebrew phrase there, gopher wood, means laminated wood. I held in my hand a piece that Ron Wyatt brought back from the ark site in the Valley of 8. It was about 2.5 feet long, about 4 inches thick, and it was 3 layers of wood cross-grained to each other. Plywood, similar, like the beams in this ceiling, laminated wood. And if that is indeed what gopher wood means, and Noah built it out of laminated wood, I held it in my hand, petrified, very heavy. And the layers were stuck together with tar, and they had been pressed together where the 3 layers were bonded to each other, just like we make plywood today. And I'd say a 600-year-old fellow with a higher IQ than we have today would figure out a way to do that, no problem. Then, let's see if I cover all this. He talked about me pulling a theatrical stunt, or I forget his exact words there, by using slides and charts to dazzle the audience and to overwhelm you with evidence. And yet his whole presentation was offering evidence with lack of slides and visuals that you can't build a boat over 300 feet long. They're doing exactly what he's accusing me of doing. I'm trying to educate. I'm trying to show it could be done. It's very scientifically possible. And the example of using all the extremes. Then he mentioned about the different species, 100 different varieties or species of the bovine family, the cows and sheep. I don't know how they were divided before the flood, but you can ask any cattle breeder. You can get a variety in just 20 or 30 years. Dogs, you could start with 50 dogs from the dog pound, get 50 generic mutts, and in less than 200 years, you could develop all 250 varieties that we have today on the earth. You could go from the Great Dane to the St. Bernard to the Chihuahua. That can be done. It's incredible the variation available within the genetic structure. With natural breeding processes, usually the species tends to remain more stable. But if there's geographic separation, isolation, because of living on different continents, then the species tend to vary even more. And eventually they might get to the place where they cannot interbreed. Alaska rabbits cannot interbreed with Florida rabbits. But Alaska rabbits can interbreed with rabbits from Minnesota. And Minnesota rabbits can interbreed with Florida rabbits. So the Florida rabbit and the Alaska rabbit have diversified where they're no longer interfertile because their breeding cycle is different. But they're still a rabbit. Nothing has changed. It's the same kind of animal. It's a different variety now of rabbit. And some can stand the cold weather, some can stand the hot weather. But that could easily happen in 4,400 years. That can be done in 20 years in the laboratory with no problem. Let's see. He wanted you to believe that it's impossible for these animals to vary in 5,000 years from the kinds on the ark to the varieties we have today, and yet he believes tomatoes changed into people. The philosophy of evolution. You talk about variation. I don't care how much time you give them zillions of years, you're never going to get a tomato to change into a person, no matter how gradually. They talk about, well, it's a miracle, you know, if a frog turns into a prince instantly, that's got to be a miracle. That's a fairy tale. You know, you kiss the frog and it turns to a prince. I agree, that would be a miracle. And yet evolution teaches the frog did change to the prince, but it took 300 million years. It is still a miracle. If a man races across the air, we say, well, it's a miracle. Well, if he walks slowly through the air, is it less of a miracle? Time that's silly. I mean, oh, no, that didn't happen fast. That would be a miracle, but it happens slowly. Evolution is still just a pagan religion, and it relies on miracles. They cannot explain where the original matter came from. They can't explain where the laws came from. They can't explain where life came from. And yet they want to teach that in the science classes and have our kids learn that. And they're upset about creation getting into the classroom. They better look in the mirror and see what's in those textbooks now. We're teaching all kinds of pagan things that cannot be proven. We're teaching the frog turned into the prince. I taught biology. You should see the charts. There's the frog at the bottom and the prince at the top. It's the same fairy tale, and that has never been demonstrated. So if their argument is we shouldn't have creation in the classroom because it is not scientific, I'll say, I agree, let's get evolution out for the very same reasons. Evolution is not scientific either. And unless they're going to teach both, they should teach neither one. I say, well, a majority of scientists believe in evolution. The majority of people believed the world was flat at one time too. They didn't flatten it out. And you can't use majority opinion as an argument at all. The assumptions, though, that he brought up here, assuming, of course, that man is ignorant and we are advanced, is a faulty assumption. I think man was advanced and we are ignorant. Prove that's wrong. As far as special diets, the Bible says in Genesis chapter 6, verse 21, God said, "And take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them." If you refer back to Genesis 1:29, God told Adam and Eve and the animals, Genesis 1:29 and 30, all the animals and all the people were vegetarian before the flood. Nobody ate meat. He didn't have to keep the lions away from the lambs on the ark. They were all vegetarian, and people can live fine on vegetables and fruits today. Even grizzly bears can get by on nuts and berries, though Yogi doesn't like to. They would like to have meat. And panda bears can eat a wide variety of food. Panda bears can eat meat. They're usually too lazy to go get it, but if you feed a panda bear meat, he'll eat it. Ask a zookeeper if panda bears are restricted to a particular kind of bamboo. I think you'll find that was an over-exaggeration. They can eat a variety. Plus, we don't know that the animals we have today and their specialized diets, they may have adapted to that special diet. That would be adaptation from the last 4,400 years. They live in a particular forest all their life and generations, and pretty soon they get to where they cannot handle other foods. That's not proof that they all ate that 4,400 years ago. They may have eaten a wider variety back then, and we may have variation within the created kind where now it is more specialized. That could happen. A friend of mine up in Minnesota has 2 aquariums. He has a saltwater